Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining Live Since You Asked this afternoon. We're very happy to have with us today Jane Mason, St. John's Prep class of 1977, retired FBI, sorry, and the CEO of Secure Investigations. Jane, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to talk with you. You're coming to us from Seaside, New Jersey, and earlier we got to see the view. You get to see the ocean. Most of us don't get to see that here, but at least you have a little bit of a break to see what's happening. Jane, we have about 20 students that are with us this afternoon, and as I said, we're just going to throw some questions out to you, and then to our students, you have an opportunity to ask Jane questions as well. Jane, I shared with you a little earlier. I got an email when we tweeted out that we were talking this afternoon, and somebody was all confused and said, "How did a woman named Jane graduate from St. John's Prep in 1977?" Would you mind just sharing with our students kind of how that all came to be, and how St. John's what type of impact St. John's had on you and your experience?
Sure, of course. I'd love to share that. So for a brief period of time in the 1970s, St. John's Prep accepted women students, girls. So there was an all-girls school in Salem named St. Chrétien Academy, and in the early 70s, they announced they were closing because of financial issues, budgetary issues. And so it was a kindergarten through high school school for girls. And so St. John's welcomed females from sophomore, junior, and senior years, starting I think in 1972 and then ending in my class 1977. So I think we figured it out. There were about 57 female graduates from St. John's Prep. And so, for example, in my class of a little over 200 students, we had 9 females. So it was a pretty interesting experience. You know, most of the time we were all the only, female in the classroom, and so we couldn't get away with anything because we stood out so much. But
Sure.
it was also nice because we formed lifelong relationships with each other, within the female group, and also lifelong relationships with all of the male students that we were in class with, because it was just such a unique bond. And so I treasure that. And the other part of my experience there that I really, really treasure, obviously the education, but it laid just such a wonderful foundation. I think it does for each and every student of St. John's Prep, just such a wonderful foundation for what the future holds, what the future can be, and sort of what kind of person you're going to become because of that foundation.
That's great. It's great to hear that was really present in the 1970s, and that's a big part of what we're trying to do right now. It's not just the book smarts and the academic, but it's to form the whole person.
Absolutely.
How did you go from being one of 9 young women to graduate in St. John's Prep in 1977 to part of the FBI? Can you talk a little bit about how that journey took place?
Oh, definitely. So actually, before I attended St. John's Prep, the famous FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, passed away. And he was totally against having females as special agents of the FBI. Within 2 weeks, legislation was enacted allowing women to apply to be female special agents. And I was reading the newspaper one day with my mother when that got announced, and I just said, that is exactly what I want to do. I love solving mysteries, and I love sort of those kinds of cases. I loved the Nancy Drew type of things. And it was something that just sort of, the more I learned about the FBI, the more I became convinced that that is absolutely, my future. So when I was at the prep, I called the FBI in Boston and I said, what do I need to do? And at the time they were mostly recruiting accountants for white collar crime cases or lawyers for, all kinds of reasons. And so I loved math. I just loved math at the prep. And so I decided, okay, I'll go like the math route. And that's what led me to go to Babson College and get my accounting degree there. And then after that, I worked for a while as an accountant, because you have to be 23 before you can be accepted as an agent.
Okay.
The age group is 23 to 37.
Okay.
So I applied, got in, and then I stayed for 28 years.
Wow. What were some of the highlights? I mean, it's pretty grueling work. You're not always working with positive elements of society and kind of seeing the negative side of things. What inspired you to stay for 28 years and continue with the work?
Well, it really was my dream job. So literally every day I woke up extremely excited about getting to work and more cases, solving more crimes, putting more bad guys in jail. So it was sort of a self-motivated motivating job in a way, that way. And some of the highlights, I mean, I had so many big white collar crime cases that I really enjoyed working. They were challenging and, involved big, huge teams of people. And so over the years, you just develop so many skills that, that enable you to work these bigger cases and, solve some of these bigger crimes. And then I also specialized in evidence collection. So we did a lot of international travel if Americans were involved in, say, a terrorist activity overseas. We would travel there and process crime scenes. And so there were lots and lots of different cases like that.
When you think about kind of the work that you were doing, obviously lots of pressure, lots of kind of a spotlight on performance and making sure things go right. What are some of the essential skills that you developed to kind of manage the stress and the pressure and the expectations and the challenges of that job? And what advice would you have for our students in kind of developing the skill set that they need to cope with the different stress that they might feel as students at St. John's?
Well, one of the first things I realized, most of this I learned since becoming an FBI agent, but I really wish I had known it beforehand. But it's like how when you're on a plane and they do the announcement and they say if the oxygen comes down, you take the oxygen first and then you can help others with it. It's like you have to be solid within yourself and then you can be sort of that whole person to help others, to do big things. So I sort of rely on that and I think about that every day. And so every morning I wake up and I do a few things to make sure that I'm accomplishing the things and sort of putting forth the self I want to put forth. So this all unfolded, a lot of it at the training academy at Quantico for, the FBI it was 16 weeks at the time, and I think now it's 22 weeks.
Wow.
We had physical training is really rigorous down there. So our PT instructor was a guy named Bill Rogers. And when I got to Quantico, he terrified me. Our first day, he ate a lit cigarette just to prove, the importance of healthy lifestyles. He terrified me. But by the end of Quantico, he had become probably one of the top 3 most influential people in my life as far as being a positive role model. He said, if something is difficult, envision the goal, picture the finish line. So if we were running a long distance, just picture it, and it will manifest itself. And I learned by keeping that practice that it's true. I mean, it may not happen overnight and you may have to set smaller goals, but I really believe that. And I put that into my sort of daily practice. What are my small goals today to lead to my bigger goals? So that's one of the main things that I find very helpful, especially in a complicated world, especially now when we're adding the COVID-19 isolation into the mix. You just have to make sure you've got your inner strength. And the other two things I do every day is I have gratitude. I'm grateful and I make sure I express that. And that strengthens many people just to have that sort of mentality. And I try every single day to do something to help somebody else. For me, that really serves me very well because for some reason it just gives me strength to be able to do things for others.
It's amazing. It's been amazing to watch kind of how different people have helped out different organizations within our own community and beyond, and kind of that a lot of times that gratitude comes from the interaction of working with others. There's a couple of our students have already chimed in with questions, but they're looking. A couple of them are now looking to pursue careers in the FBI as high school students. What advice would you give them about how to meet with success in that goal, or to kind of prepare themselves for that journey?
So the FBI always says they claim they're a second career, meaning
Okay.
um, you they want to have a pool of FBI agents or professional staff that represents the United States, represents the people that can relate to every kind of person in this country. So they don't want only accountants, they don't want only lawyers. They definitely don't want as the top picks people from criminal justice degrees. And a lot of people are unaware of that. They'll think, oh, I want to go into law enforcement, so I'll get my degree in criminal justice. And for places like the FBI, it's just the opposite. They want you to have different experience. They'll teach you about criminal justice and the laws and things like that. So there are some law enforcement entities that do appreciate criminal justice programs. So I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying for the FBI
Sure.
alone. So my advice would be, if you have something you love or a school you definitely want to go to or apply to, or something you enjoy, is very helpful, to actually get through college with success. So I recommend highly doing something that you enjoy, and then the same thing after college, finding a job or a career or the activity that is also going to provide you with sort of self-gratitude, self-fulfillment. And then when you're old enough, you can apply and you will be able to bring so much to the table. So it's not about, when you're applying at the FBI, it's not about what the FBI can do for me. It's what can I do for the FBI and this country to uphold this country's constitution. So the more you think like that, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand. I'll go there and I'll say, well, this was my goal, to be an FBI agent. So these are just examples. So you could say, so I learned how to code, or I learned Arabic, or I researched the FBI's needs now, and I made sure that I am an expert in certain matters. So it's all about what you can bring to them, and then the sky is the limit. Once you're accepted, you have so many opportunities to do great, great things. And I highly recommend it as a career.
Sure. Oh, that's
A
great.
couple of things. Don't do drugs. That's one thing that will knock you out from the get-go. And then something we learned this year when I brought a few FBI agents into the War and Peace class
Right, with
was
Mr. Britton.
Mr. Britton's War and Peace class. You can't do CBD oil either. You can't have anything to do with it. So that's just one thing I learned this year. So avoid all of those things.
That's great. No, I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about is kind of right in line with what we talk about at school on the the kind of concept of servant leadership, of don't do something just because it's going to make you help you, but how are you influencing a situation for the benefit of others, and thinking about the larger purpose. And then also just kind of the wellness commitment of caring for yourself in a healthy and holistic way. A couple of our students have asked Jane, in the work, your 28 years at the FBI, is there a memorable case where you really feel like you made a difference that you're able to talk about, or share some details kind of from that experience that really impacted you, or you felt you had a really positive impact on?
So the most meaningful, and I think probably a lot of people say this exact same thing. So, even so, upon reflection, I think about cases all the time, and there were just so many. But the one that obviously had the biggest impact on me was 9/11. So at the time, I was working in Lower Manhattan on a white-collar crime squad, but I was also on what the FBI calls the evidence response team. So that's the team that it's a responsive team, and we go from small, tiny little cases for evidence collection all the way to the international, international bombings and other types of international crime. So when 9/11 happened, the entire team was put on evidence collection duty. So I started off at what is the Staten Island landfill, which is where all the debris from the Twin Towers was brought, so that we could go through each and every little tiny piece of dust to see if anything of importance was present. So we were looking at early on, we were looking for any personal belongings, any identifications. We were looking to identify who the actual hijackers were of the planes. We were looking for the black boxes and other evidence, and of course, human remains. So I worked on that as a team leader for 9 months. And
Wow.
so I worked for a few months at the landfill, and then I went to Ground Zero to sort of be in charge of the night shift at the command post there. So there were so many people who worked on that case. So I had a very small role, but still it was such an important matter to me that it is probably the most significant thing I feel that I worked on.
I can only imagine how challenging that was on multiple fronts, just kind of with so many unknowns and so many different challenges, and trying to find the evidence has got to be, I mean, the work that everybody did is pretty impactful. So thank you for all you did there.
Yeah, it was a surreal time, sort of like now is a little surreal to me.
Right.
It was definitely surreal then too.
We're all familiar, and I'm going to try and phrase this question the right way. Just push me back if I go the wrong way. A couple questions about, the FBI has made news, and our society is pretty polarized right now.
Yes.
When you kind of look at kind of in some ways what's happened with either Clinton's emails or the interactions between former Director Comey and President Trump, and somebody brought up the Peter Strzok issue from 2018. Can you talk a little bit about, just as someone who's retired, the challenges that you see of kind of staying impartial, staying neutral, but trying to do that in the midst of a pretty polarized time, and pretty challenging time, and what your thoughts are? And I'm sure it's a little easier to talk about it as a retired FBI agent than an active duty FBI agent, but what are your thoughts on all those different issues? And I think I got the essence of what everyone was asking about.
Well, I mean, it's a very complex time, and so even from day one, I always just cringed when an FBI agent was accused of wrongdoing. It just put such a stain on the entire agency, and it just always bothered me. So now, yes, with all of the allegations, first of all, I'm sure we don't know even half of the story. So I take all these news reports, I do take with a huge grain of salt. But what I rely upon is the leadership at the FBI. Current Director Wray is such an outstanding leader for the FBI. I think he is exactly what was needed at exactly the right time. He is laid back. He is very interested in sort of his assets, and his assets are his employees. And he loves the retired employees as well. So I've met with him. He's addressed retired agents, retired professional staff. He's just so he understands the dynamics of what's going on. For someone who's not been in the FBI prior to all of this happening, he understands exactly sort of the roadmap the FBI needs to take. And he's doing it sort of very humbly and quietly. And that's the first thing he said was, I know I'm not making a splash in the news every day. And everybody's like, yeah, well, that's probably a good thing at this point. So he focuses on, let's get the job done. We have a job. Yes, this is all noise, and sometimes it gets louder, sometimes it gets softer, but we have a job to do, and that job is our most important goal. And he says he'll deal with all of these big Washington politics type of things. And I think that's exactly the message that should be sent, and I'm very grateful for that.
It's great. It's one of the things on a different institution. I talk with my kids a lot about what it was like for me growing up and being really involved in our parish and the church, and how things have changed. And there's just not a lot of trust in institutions right now. And it seems like, from what you're saying, Director Wray's approach of kind of humble, quiet, focusing on the mission and focusing on the job is really a way to restore that trust in some ways, and just kind of connect Director Wray with Bill Belichick. Just do your job and kind of move it forward. One of our students is asking that, as you mentioned that you have had the opportunity to travel internationally and doing different investigations. What was your favorite international destination and case that you worked on kind of outside of the United States?
Well, my absolute favorite case, for a whole lot of reasons, was so the New York Evidence Response Team was invited by NCIS which was stationed in Dubai at the time, to
Yeah.
help them process an oil tanker that had been hijacked a year prior. And negotiations were underway for the release of the oil tanker from the Somali hijackers to the owner of the oil tanker. And once that handoff was made, we were going to board the tanker and execute sort of what would be like a search warrant, search the whole ship and find evidence. So by the time we get to it, and we had to go to Salalah, Oman. It's on the south shore of Oman, pretty close to Yemen. So it's absolutely beautiful. My first trip to that region. And by the time we land and arrived there, negotiations had fallen through with the release of the tanker. So we had to wait around for a while. And so, we got to see beautiful Oman. So that was fabulous. But then negotiations picked up again and the tanker was released. So we boarded the tanker along with NCIS personnel and Omani police officers. So it was super interesting in that respect as well. So we saw all the people who had been working on the tanker when it was hijacked were still on it. So, we helped them and they were released, and then we executed the warrant there, searching for the evidence. And just culturally, it was very interesting. There was just so much interesting about it. And then, was out in the middle of the Arabian Sea, and we had to take 2 boats to get there. So it was very, very interesting, very different from anything I had done here. So that was probably one of my the best overseas assignments. The other overseas assignments involved a lot of either bombing or death or a lot of destruction, more so than this even.
And you get some quiet time before when the negotiations were off, to see some beauty of the world. That's great. It's always a benefit. Jane, you've been really active with the Prep alumni board, and a big part of what we've talked about is mentoring. And one of our students is asking, when you think about your journey and your career, are there people who have said things to you that have kept with you, or have been mentors for you and kind of helped you move through the process of kind of school to Babson to accountant to FBI to now being CEO of your own business? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship?
Sure, absolutely. Yes. So first, as far as the being active in the alumni group, yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to just tell everybody how important that group will be to all of them in the very near future, because I don't think I was very focused on it when I was still enrolled as a student at the Prep. But I know it's much more interactive now. So yes, and as far as mentors, there have been mentors throughout my life. I mean, I'm a little on the older side now, so I've lost a lot of my mentors. One mentor of mine actually is not only a retired FBI agent, but he's also a St. John's Prep graduate, and that's Charlie Gianturco.
Yep.
So Charlie Gianturco graduated sometime in the 60s. I forget.
He's 68.
68. Wow. Do you have everybody?
It's all up here.
And he is such a solid person for me in my life. He's always there. So, it's nice at this point in my life just to have that just in case. I don't necessarily need him all that much. I do more of the mentoring now than needing a mentor. But it's a very important role. And I think that the more mentors you can keep and develop and accumulate and keep the old ones, that you'll be much better off than just trying to go it alone.
Sure. No, it's great advice. There's still a lot of alums I talk to kind of think back to Prep teachers and Prep coaches who had an important impact, and keep that contact. But building that mentoring network is so important.
Absolutely. Very.
So one of our students is going back to your work on 9/11, and when you think about kind of how you worked as an FBI agent prior to 9/11, and you think about life after 9/11, how did that series of events kind of impact or change how you did your work as an FBI agent on a day-to-day basis, or did it have any impact on that?
It did have a huge impact on all of us that worked on that. And I think for me, by the end of the 9 months, so we closed the command post on Memorial Day the following year. So it was 9 months of work down there. And I think I realized sort of the gravity of our job, a little bit more than I had ever considered it before. Was just, all right, this is a matter of life and death. And, I was already putting in 200% every single day,
Sure.
but I was able, because of that, it sort of motivated me a little bit, and I was able to put in even more. It was just like I sort of realized the importance of all of this to sort of the nth degree, another degree.
Great.
And it just sort of helped me step up and do even more.
That's great. Earlier this week, I think actually yesterday, we talked with a prep alum from class of '89, Nathan Richardson. He's an entrepreneur in the world of financial technology. He talked a lot about kind of the crisis in leadership, not kind of from a political perspective, but just kind of across the board. And you've already talked about some role models and mentors had an impact on your life. For our students, as someone who, as you said, is kind of on the other end of her career, what is the advice that you can offer to them about how they can be leaders, and kind of what we talk about at St. John's, servant leaders in the world and beyond?
Hmm. Well, okay. So number one, I think it's very important to do something you love. And a lot of people will say to me, I don't know what I want to do, or I don't have a goal, or I don't know what I would love. And so for people like that, I think it deserves a period of self-reflection. I think it is so important to know what you love and what you want to do, and that's so important to be successful at something, that I think that if you're not 100% sure, it's definitely worth taking the time to consider what is important to you, like what lights that fire for you. And and then it's a matter of achieving the dreams, right? So, your dreams could be, I have a dream for today, or I have a dream that will only take me a week, or I have a dream, to change the world. And it doesn't matter the size of the dream. Your dream can be accomplished, and it's a matter of whatever size the dream is, you just need to start setting your goals. So if you have a change the world dream, you need smaller goals because it probably won't happen overnight.
Right.
So a couple of things that I've done, I read a lot about how to set goals. What's a good way to stay motivated and stay positive and continue setting your goals. And one book that I love is called Believe and Achieve by W. Clement Stone, and it's a lot. And it's not a recent book either, but he discusses goal setting, and he discusses, if you set your goals every single day and you just say to yourself, just do it, just do it, just do it, you can convince yourself that I'm just going to do it. Something came up,
Sure.
and so I am just going to do it. So I think that's super important. And then, you eventually will get to the place that you had originally set your goal to achieve.
That's great advice. Kind of to close out our time together, Jane, we talked a little bit before we went live on the broadcast. A lot of your work today as a CEO of your own company, you're doing investigations and supporting women who've been victims of sexual assaults. I talked a little bit about what we're trying to do at St. John's with a call to men, and really advocating for our students to be men who step outside of the man box, men who are committed to gender equity, and men who are committed to forming healthy and positive relationships with women. As someone who was one of 9 members of a high school class in 1977, and one of the pioneers in the FBI as a woman, what advice can you give, or what challenge can you give to our students when it comes to gender equity and healthy relationships and positive relationships with women, especially given the work that you do today?
So I think that your program is a great program that you're all involved in. So I think that communication is very important in relationships, right? I mean, everybody says, does yes mean yes, or what does yes really mean? And I think that if you're communicating, you really understand where the person is coming from. I don't think it's like all that murky. But I think it's a matter of respect. I think that the boys at the prep are learning how to respect others, how to respect women as individuals. And I think that if you have that level of respect and you communicate with others well, and if you're questioning something, then make sure it's crystal clear before you proceed with any action. I think that you're going to do very, very well.
Sure. I think that key of respect is really essential of making sure that, you know, in the relationship there is a core amount of respect, and thinking about what we say and how we say it and what our attitudes are is really key as well.
Absolutely.
Jane, thank you so much for your time. I
Thanks.
really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And for our students, if you take Mr. Britton's class, you'll have the opportunity to connect with Jane, and there's other active duty FBI agents that come as part of that class presentation. But thank you for all you do for St. John's as part of our alumni board, as part of our alumni affinity group, and especially for the work that you're doing right now. It's really important to make sure that the victims of sexual assault have a supportive voice and someone who's there with them to help them get the justice that they need. So thanks, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Take care to St. John's. This is our last episode for this week. So we will see you on Monday, April 27th, and we have a conversation that day with the larger prep community. It's open to our alumni as well to connect with Mike Angelakis, class of 1982, the former CFO of Comcast Corporation. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks.